There's a feeling that the Uni Party, the Liberal Labour Party, basically take most of their policies and agendas from, let's say, global agendas. So global agendas pushed down by these global organizations. You have the World Economic Forum, you have the World Health Organization. They have policies that they want everyone else to implement.
Hello and welcome to The Focus. I'm John Bruni. Across much of the democratic world, we are witnessing growing political volatility. Leadership changes are accelerating, economic pressures are reshaping domestic politics, and voters appear increasingly skeptical of traditional political parties. But some of the most revealing political dynamics are not always found in Washington, D.C., London, or Brussels. Sometimes they emerge at the state or provincial level. This weekend, on Saturday, the 21st of March, voters in South Australia will head to the polls in a contest that may appear local, but which reflects broader trends reshaping democratic politics everywhere: leadership dominance, economic anxiety, energy transition, and the widening divide between metropolitan and regional communities. Today, I'm joined by George-Alexander Mamalis, a political commentator and the host of the YouTube channel George Mamalis TV. George has become an interesting voice in Australian political commentary because he looks at politics a little differently from the usual run-of-the-mill stuff. Instead of just focusing on party talking points or day-to-day political drama, George tends to step back and look at the bigger picture, the cultural shifts, the leadership questions, and the deeper frustrations that voters often feel, but that don't always get captured in polling numbers. As a South Australian boy like myself, he's also someone who has been paying very close attention to the political dynamics here in South Australia, a place that might seem quiet from the outside, but actually tells us a lot about what's happening across Western democracies more broadly. George, welcome to The Focus.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's an honor.
George, before we dive into the big political questions, I want to start with you.
Yep.
What's your background? What was the thing that first sparked your interest in politics? And was there a particular moment or issue that made you think, I've got to get into this thing?
Good question. So I guess it all stems from a bit of my upbringing. So I come from a Greek Orthodox background, and Greeks are quite typically very dramatic, and we love our politics, and we love sitting on the dinner table screaming at each other about anything. So growing up with that environment really shaped who I am today. But if you want to get to what really kind of kickstarted everything, in 2013, I started my degree at the University of Adelaide in mineral geoscience. So I actually have a degree in science. That's my background. So growing up,
Ah,
I was always inspired by people like Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, Sir
mm,
Douglas Mawson, Howard Florey, these greats in South Australia
yeah.
that we praise so highly here.
Mm, mm,
And I started also something called the Adelaide Set, which is a platform to showcase the city of Adelaide, and in particular the small businesses around South Australia, entrepreneurship, and young people doing cool things. So my whole
mm,
focus on that platform was primarily around cafes, bars, hospitality, nightclubs, anything that was kind of hip and fun. And Adelaide at the time was having a bit of a boom with Peel Street and Lee Street opening up. So you
mm,
saw almost like a renaissance in terms of hospitality here in the city of Adelaide. So I was right there at the sweet spot, and my
mm.
platform actually blew up quite quickly. In 6 months, I reached over 8,000 followers, and this is right at the same time I'm doing my university degree. So I had to make a choice between do I want to study hard or do I want to party hard, kind of essentially. So I
Mm.
decided to do both. So I did the social media thing, and then I also did the study thing, and I managed to get both of them done, which is great. I finally got my degree in 2019 in mineral geoscience. And at the same time, the Adelaide set was thriving and doing really well, amassing lots of followers, plenty of clicks, and I just love social media. And it's quite funny
Mm.
because 13 years ago when I started doing this, people told me I was crazy for doing social media. They said it's only going to last a year, and what a ridiculous business model to start a social media platform. So I thought that was quite funny as well.
Yeah, yeah. Look, honestly, I sympathize with you on that one because I think a lot of my friends are thinking, what the hell are you doing with this YouTube nonsense? Yeah.
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 Yeah. So look, it's quite a look. You got to be a contrarian. You got to be out there, and that was part of the thing. So look, the Adelaide Set platform is back then was just kind of focused on small business, which some would say is political in its own essence. Small business is
Mm,
kind of like individualism, entrepreneurship. I guess you could say capitalism.
mm,
So there was always elements of politics involved, even if it wasn't so conscious to my followers and the people around me. What really kind of kickstarted into politics was the pandemic. A lot of my clients and people who I showcase lost their businesses or suffered heavily due to the lockdowns and the mandates. And I was quite privileged at school. I went to school with these guys whose father, named Nikolai Petrovsky, who's a professor at the Flinders University. He was one of the top professors for vaccine research. And this is right in the middle of the pandemic. And I knew him growing up. So, I used to go to his house, play tennis. I knew the kids growing up. They were good friends of mine. So he was the perfect kind of Adelaide to have during the pandemic. And in fact, within 2 months of the pandemic, he developed his own protein-based vaccine, which is, I'm not sure if your
wow.
followers or you're aware, protein-based vaccine is a technology we've been using for 50 years
Mm,
in terms of vaccines. And it was a great platform, something we've all had as kids. Most of us have had protein-based vaccines. So I naturally were attracted to that as an alternative to what the big American companies were doing with Pfizer and stuff with the mRNA
mm,
vaccines. There was always a bit of, as a scientist, I was more of a contrarian scientist. I'd always question everything. I never would take anything at face value. My heart was set on this, but unfortunately, this professor, when he came forward with these ideas and these new vaccine and also the criticism he had around mRNA, that instantly caused a political storm, let's just say, because the
yeah.
whole narrative back then was you must follow the government narrative no matter what. No questioning anything. And if you did online on Instagram or Facebook, your post would either get censored or banned or you get in a lot of trouble. So as a young man back then, at 24, 25 years old, whatever I was, it was quite confusing because growing up in Australia, I always believed Australia to be a place of freedom and expression and pioneering and great scientists and supporting scientists. Listening to Sir Douglas Mawson's stories at school and at university, and these contrarian scientists who would go and do ridiculous things, like go to Antarctica and barely get out alive, and just all these
Mm,
amazing stories. And it just felt strange that the government here, the federal government and the state government, just didn't want to support one of our own pioneering scientists who was highly regarded as one of the greatest vaccine researchers of all time. So that initially is what kind of formed the catalyst that got me into politics. And I used the Adelaide Set, which was quite big at the time, to be one of the big voices in Australia and South Australia around being questioning the mandates, questioning these vaccine technologies like the mRNA, and was more of a proponent of protein-based vaccines. Said, hey, let's back our own scientists here. We're one of the best scientists in the world. And that basically put me to war with the state government, which was funny because at the time I was actually working in a minister's office. So I was actually working for David Spears
okay.
at the time in a minister's
Right.
office.
Mm,
So it
mm,
was a very weird, fiery time for everyone. But it was, yeah, that was what got me into politics and kind of, I got a choice. As a young man, you don't get many options in life or choices where you have to kind of stand up to yourself and go, am I going to follow the crowd here? Or am I going to make my own choice and do what I think is right and what is
mm,
scientifically correct in my mind? Because as a young boy, when you're reading about people like Leonardo da Vinci and Albert Einstein, these guys weren't, and Isaac Newton, these guys weren't easygoing kind of guys. These guys are always pushing the envelope, always getting in trouble, and always
mm.
causing problems. So I got a lot of inspiration from that as well. I'm not saying, by the way, I'm any level of intelligence to them, but I think it's important as a young man to read about these great scientists because you can get a lot of inspiration and motivation from these guys.
Well, look, I do empathize with you. Our show in particular has a dear friend, and that is Professor Avi Loeb, and you probably have heard of his daring do in terms of trying to create a different, more broader based understanding of the universe. He himself has come across a lot of flack, and it is interesting to follow his particular journey. I mean, there are some people who accept what he's trying to explain. There are many who just reject it outright, and particularly from the established scientific community. So there is that sort of wish to standardize across the board rather than give someone a go, see whether or not it works, test it. It's all part of the scientific process, by the way. You need to test it. And if you're wrong, well, then the facts speak for themselves. You don't have to wait for someone's opinion. But of course, all our institutions, whether they be scientific or political, they don't work in that kind of capacity, which I find difficult, but it is what it is. And there is that kind of centralizing, standardizing, homogenizing aspect to our lives that cut across the political spectrum, the scientific spectrum, and even the economic spectrum for that matter. But for our viewers joining us internationally,
Yeah.
South Australia is a state of about 1.8 million people. Most of its population are concentrated here in Adelaide, in the capital of South Australia. That concentration, of course, means that elections are often decided by just a handful of suburban seats. George, how should international audiences understand the political landscape in South Australia right now?
Look, the South Australian election is kind of the first election that's going to happen, and it's going to be quite an important one because for all the international listeners, we have a phenomena here with a populist party called One Nation, who's been around for quite a long time, maybe 3 decades. Pauline Hanson is the founder of the party, and she's always had a strong message of this anti-immigration, in particular anti-mass immigration. She believed small immigration was best for the country, and for 30 years, people didn't really like her. They called her a racist. They put her in jail at one point. But she always stood behind this message, and it's just been relentless for 10, 20, 30 years. Now, what we're seeing across the world, as you saw in the Americans, in the UK, even in other places, we're seeing, for example, in Europe, Germany, etc., we're seeing a huge sentiment towards anti-immigration, anti-illegal immigration, anti-mass immigration, because there is a sentiment in the air that a lot of Western countries are currently losing their cultural identity because of the amount of people coming in so quickly, which doesn't give a lot of time for one, infrastructure, which is quite important. So in South Australia, and I'm sure a lot of countries across the world, we're having a ramping problem. That means that when you need to go to the hospital, you might have to wait 10 hours, maybe even longer. And that's led to deaths in our state. And that's just simply because we just don't have the facilities and there's just too many people in going to the health system and it's just clogging up everything and it's causing a huge amount of problems. So the argument isn't just like, oh, we don't like a certain race or a certain culture. It does come from an infrastructural health issue as well, foremost. But then, of course, you have the cultural aspect as well. Typically in Australia, we had something called the White Australia policy for a very long time. And in the 60s, that kind of got taken away. And we had a huge influx of Greeks, Italians, and Vietnamese, and some other Asian countries come here. And that was quite hard for a lot of Australians. And these Greeks and Italians had to go through a lot of, let's say, friction. But over time, these populations worked pretty hard. They kept their heads down, and they did very well. A lot of them are quite wealthy now, successful, and have a huge identity in Australia. What we're seeing now is such a huge acceleration of mass immigration that it's causing a lot of fear. And then we look at the UK, we see UK Reform Party, UK Restore Party. We see what's happening in America with Trump wanting to build the wall, and there's 20, 30 million illegal immigrants he wants to kick out with ICE and deportations. So I think that overseas outlook and output has come into Australia now because we've just seen something like 1.4 million people, you might need to fact check me, that come into this country in a matter of years, which has never happened historically in this country. It's just changed every state, every aspect of everything. So the reason why South Australia is so significant is because it's the first time, the first testing ground for One Nation to truly spread its wings with this message of anti-mass immigration and also that element of that populist movement that we're seeing across the entire world and how that's going to carry out in Australia. The current Prime Minister, Albanese, got very lucky. He was one of the only left-leaning governments that survived an election. Most of them were, as you saw with Trump and places like Argentina, a lot of right-wing governments came in under this populist message. But somehow, in this country, we didn't have that. And that was partly because the opposition here put up a really bad I'd say a really bad opposition leader. His name was Peter Dutton, quite an intelligent man, but he looks like Voldemort. And for a lot of people in Australia, they are quite frightened by someone that looks like that. And unfortunately, the Liberal Party didn't lean into his looks. They kind of just ignored it. And if you're going to look like that, then you're going to need to have some charisma or some character. Let's say like Winston Churchill, for example. He wasn't the best looking man, but he had character. He had the cigars, he had the champagne, he had the accent, he had a vibe that people could fall in love with back then. Unfortunately, P. Dutton missed the mark on that, and he just got wiped down the election. And yeah, now we're left with with the Labor government here who are using immigration as a policy to cover up our lack of birth fertility in this country. So, for example, we're just not having enough kids in Australia. The only way the government can sustain an economy here is through population growth. So, if we're not having enough people being born here, they have to bring people here essentially to cover up for the lack of fertility, the lack of birth rate here.
Okay,
What?
but George, hang on just one second. Look,
Yep.
I agree with the direction you're heading into, but I wanted to raise something with regard to the longevity of these problems. I mean, a lot of people who would be observing Australian politics and seeing the phenomenon that you rightly point out is happening all over the world, where there's the rise of the populist right in Europe, in North America, and elsewhere. But here in Australia, you talk about the amount of migrants that are coming into the country and the fact that we're covering off on the fact that we're not having enough kids locally, so we need to have the migrants come in to pile drive our economy. But I remember many years ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was a member of the Liberal Party, and we were having very fiery debates between the business community who supported a big Australia and other people, and I would hazard a guess that I was part of the other side of a small Australia, because we could see that the overcrowding of Australian cities, based as we are on a desert continent where fertile land is hard to come by, water is extremely hard to come by, and if you start cramming people inside our cities, the sort of urban landscape that we'll have left over will end up looking pretty third world. And having said that, it's really quite strange, because as I've seen Adelaide develop over the last few years, I've noticed that we're starting to see more people on the street, living on the street. Our park lands are full of tents, and there are people who are destitute living out there because they can't afford a home, or the government can't afford to build enough housing for people, which in and of itself is a scandal. We seem to have all the all the kind of money in the world for bread and circuses. If you want to set up another Adelaide Fringe or a WOMAD or another football stadium, we've got plenty of money for that. But we somehow magically don't have any money to fix the thing that you mentioned earlier, the ambulance ramping. We've got no money to look after the housing and get all those destitute people off out of the parklands, off the streets, and into proper housing so they can start their lives again. So, it's almost like our political parties for decades have been willfully ignoring this major issue. So there's a systemic and structural issue among the major parties. They talk about it as if they're going to do something about it. They don't do anything about it. And then we still are lumbered with those problems, those same problems that have dogged us for decades. How do you
Yeah.
explain that?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, right, with that question. First things first, economically speaking, and productivity, thus our country's productivity. In the 1960s, Australia had similar productivity levels to most European countries. Now, flash forward to now, we have the same productivity levels as Mongolia. So in essence, we have the same productivity levels as a third world country. You're right in saying that. And not just that, Australia's sitting on $4 trillion of super, which sits there and does nothing. It sits there and does absolute nothing. We're not building high-speed rail. We're not terraforming the middle of Australia. We're not building major infrastructure programs. We're not building new cities. So you're right. This country is just kind of sitting there and doing nothing, and it's quite boring. And for the last 30 years, it's kind of disgraceful, to be honest, that our leadership has been so poor. There's no reason why Australia shouldn't be one of the most forward, most powerful nations in the world. We have all the right things. We have all the resources. We have all the lands. We have We have a natural border of protection with an ocean that's full of sharks that no one would dare walk into or swim to. So we have all the right things, and we have great opportunity with China, with Indonesia, which is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, just sitting there at our doorstep waiting to be untapped. And yet we don't produce anything anymore. We don't even make cars anymore. We don't do anything anymore. We just sit here, and that's why we're called the lucky country. Because our entire economy could shut down, literally, like it did during the pandemic, and it would survive off the back of mining and gas and stuff like that. So yeah, it is a sad thing to witness. And the last 3 decades in particular have been terrible. The other thing is, in regards to why is the leadership not doing anything, I think they just don't have the long-term strategy in place. The way our political system is here, everyone's thinking quite short-term. And not only that, everyone's just trying to think, how can I save myself? How can I look good? So you mentioned the bread and circuses here in South Australia. Our current government is spending up something up to $5 billion a year in terms of getting us into debt. By 2028, we're going to have around 48 to $50 billion of debt. When the Labor government first took over in 2019, sorry, was it? No, 2017? When was it
Uh,
again?
Gosh, that's a
20,
good question.
no, 4 years. Wait, it's
Yes.
2020. Yeah, 2022. Anyways, but by the time he took over this Labor government now, that's currently in government, who's about to go for election again, we had $17 billion of debt. So our debt's almost doubled, and it's the fastest debt growth in South Australian history. So my point is that we're spending so much money on these festivals and the public sector and all these things, but none of these things actually produce economic growth. One day we're going to have to pay this back, and we haven't produced anything. We have nothing to show for it. And then, as a young male who looks out to my community and goes, "Wow, what are we doing here? Like, what are my kids and my kids' future going to look like? Are they going to have to live under austerity with this amount of debt that they're going to be pushed into?" Another thing is, in particular with South Australia, we have some of the largest resources in the world. We have oil, gas, and we have Olympic Dam, all these fantastic levels of resource here. So much so that South Australia alone should be like a Dubai or a Saudi Arabia. We have that level of resource here, but unfortunately, it's just sitting there dormant. Olympic Dam is only being tunneled right now. There's no open pit mine there because BHP understands that if they want to maximize their profits, they're going to have to wait and hold on to that resource for as long as possible. But unfortunately, that means we all have to sit here without that level of funds coming in. Another thing is the amount of taxes that a lot of these, for example, oil companies pay is quite minute compared to countries like Norway, where they have a brilliant system where they basically get paid dividends,
Yes, that's right.
which is given billions of dollars, I think trillions even, which need to fact check, trillions of dollars into the people's hands. We don't have anything like that here in the state. So the
We don't have a
sentiment,
we don't have a sovereign wealth fund, which is a scandal
yeah,
because considering all the things that you've said, you would have thought that a forward-thinking government, whether it be state-based or federal, would think, you know what, with all the wealth, the natural wealth that we have, why don't we put it aside, have a fighting fund? So, when we get hit by another pandemic, whether there's a war out there, whether there's something else, we can dip into that fund which is set aside for a rainy day and build stuff and employ people and give people hope. The very thing that we don't seem to be having a lot of these days, because I think that where I see it, we're meant to be grateful for the status quo. We're meant to just be happy with a tight labor market. This is another thing that gets my goat. So we've got a tight labor market, which means with all the fit, healthy people that are currently on social welfare. Some of them need the social welfare. I'm not saying that those people need to get off it, but I am saying that if you want to cut back on social welfare, you need to loosen up the labor market and let people work. Because, gone are the days where you could basically go, oh, gee, I feel like getting rid of this job. I'll go down the street, knock at the door and see whether they need a vacancy because invariably they won't have that vacancy. So, of course, people now are competing for fewer and fewer jobs in the marketplace, which we're meant to be grateful for because we think that that's what our capitalist economy is all about. And yet we end up having all these problems compounded by the fact that of course we bring in people who themselves go onto social welfare because many of them need to have that break before they find their way into that constricted labor market. And so we're all
Yeah.
competing for fewer and fewer positions. Again, I look at politics today, whether it's state or federal, and I say these are man management problems. Where are the competent people that can fix this? There's your question.
Yeah, look, I ask myself that every day. Where are the competent people that can fix this? And I just don't know. It's almost like they don't exist. Maybe we don't have any competent people in this country. Honestly, that's a good question to ask. Do we? Do we have any competent people left? Maybe we don't, and then that's a fair question to ask. Because 3 decades is a long time for this competency or lack of competency we've been seeing here. It's honestly a disgrace what's happened to this
Yeah,
country.
yeah, I agree.
Um, and we have to be careful because we don't end up like a Rhodesia or South Africa here, where you let things go for too long and then the wound is so deep that it turns into a fatal wound and the country gets lost completely. And we can be a danger of that here. I don't think people understand that truly. We could face a situation where we never have Australia back and we've lost the dream of Australia, which would be really sad. But yeah, look, it does come down to I think it's a lack of bravery from our leadership as well, politically speaking. A lot of the politicians here, for example, like, the Labor government and the Liberal government are being labelled as the uni party now, especially by One Nation. There's a feeling that the uni party, the Liberal Labor Party, basically take most of their policies and agendas from let's say global agendas. So global agendas pushed down by these global organizations. You have the World Economic Forum, you have the World Health Organization. They have policies that they want everyone else to implement. And these policies, like for example, climate change, the net zero thing here we've had. Net zero has been an absolute disaster for this country. It's pushed our electricity prices into unworkable amounts. Everyone here has to suffer for electricity, and it's just quite sad because the whole idea was renewables was going to be the future. And yeah, look, in some elements we do need some renewables, but we also need our people not to suffer. And also in terms of entrepreneurship and business, if you want productivity, you need cheap electricity. Look at China's electricity prices and look how much electricity they produce. It's double, I think, of America right now, and they have the most productivity, or some of the highest productivity levels in the world. So there is a correlation between cheap electricity and high productivity. So we've got high electricity here. We've got no solutions. We produce or we get oil crude here, then we send it off, that gets refined somewhere else, and then we buy it back for a premium. Because unfortunately, because our country's so lucky and people here are so rich, we get basically scammed because they're just extracting money. So I think the focus has shifted into how much money can we extract from people rather than how much can we empower their lives to be the best version of themselves, really. I think if you look at early America, even the early UK, the early Commonwealth, it was all about empowerment and giving the best opportunity. Even Sydney, when Sydney was first being created, it was all about building this awesome city. They did it in 40 years. They turned nothing into something in a very quick amount of time. It was quite impressive and turned into like a global city. There's nothing like that here. It's just how lazy can someone be? What's the next scam? Oh, NDIS. How can we drain tens of billions of dollars from the people's pockets and put it out there? And it's getting to the point where it's just frustrating now as a young man, and that's I think why we're seeing One Nation, for example, taking this message and running with it because the people have had enough, and it's going to get worse and worse. The snowball effect. More and more people will be waking up, and it's not just the Liberal Party that's splitting votes; it's also the Labor Party. The Labor Party voters have had enough, so both Labor and Liberal parties, which are our two major parties here, are under threat. And if they don't wake up, One Nation could really do something different here. But it's going to require that bourgeois class, that upper middle class to step in and help One Nation, give them policy ideas, give them support, give them communication, help with volunteer work and advocacy, and actually get involved, be activated. That's the only way we're going to save this country.
Getting onto the One Nation thing. I mean, I wanted to raise it a little bit later, but let's raise it now.
Yeah.
So, okay, so where do you see One Nation? Because you just said that if One Nation were to prove competitive in the political process, perhaps the other two parties will lift their game. But I'll put something to you here. I'm a
Okay.
cynic. I mean, my political experience has led me to a deep well of cynicism with regard to politics. I was once a true believer, but I was a young man back then. But now that I'm an aging old fart, I will say to you that I look at this one nation phenomenon, and I sit back and say, all right, I'm prepared to listen to what they have to say because I'm completely disillusioned with the two major parties. Neither of them resonate with me at all. I'm a father of young children. I want to see South Australia grow and develop in ways that I could not even imagine. Am I seeing that coming? Am I seeing an agenda coming out of the major parties giving me some belief that that's going to be the future for my children? No. Will one nation deliver? Well, here's the question. It might, or it might not. Because ultimately, all political parties, and I think that we've seen this even, you talk about the uni party of Liberal and Labor being so similar to each other. They're mirror images of each other, and that's true to a great degree. But in the end, even if one nation were to climb up the slippery slope of politics, it's also bringing in some political talent that have abandoned both Liberal and Labor. One Nation is creating itself now into a major political contender. So at what point does One Nation then just become another party? Because, when you're in opposition, you're all fired up. You've all got these ideas. You're all running around rattling the cage saying, my God, we need to do something about this, that, and the other. The other mob, they're not worth anything. They've let us down for the last 30 years. Agreed. But then when the new mob get into power, all of a sudden they start getting a little bit more tepid. They start becoming a little bit more careful about the language that they use. They start almost becoming the exact thing that they were fighting. And this is the thing that makes me quite cynical when it comes to politics. There is a degree of pragmatism that all political parties need to have to govern the country. At what point does the fire in one's belly develop a momentum by itself to truly create something new from the ground up? Or is the political evolution that we are currently seeing just another party that will come up, promise the world, and then once they get in, if they do get in, whether it be in North Terrace in Adelaide or whether they're in Canberra, they're just going to be doing exactly the same bloody thing.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is the phenomena of the sellout. We call it you
Right.
you get the contract, you sign your soul to the devil, and you just become the thing that you always hated. And you see
Yep,
that in all industries, in music, for example.
you do.
The rock star band that was doing the best, most soulful music, and then they sign that contract, and all their music gets sucked away, and they just become another cog in the machine.
Yep.
Yes, you're right. The system itself is designed to take any political party and basically transform it into what it needs to be to survive in that machine. I think what it's going to take, this is a very philosophical question, I think, what you're asking me, and almost a spiritual question. It's going to take people who have a spiritual compass, a philosophical desire to do something greater than just money. It needs to be something that's deeper and more fundamental, something that's in touch with an inner, I'm going to say God like thing. And that's kind of what we're seeing across the world is there is a rise in theological desires. You see Christianity blowing up in China, for example. In America, you're seeing Orthodoxy on a rise. So there is a huge Christian movement happening across the world. The assassination of Charlie Kirk, which has led to a huge influx and turning point. Unfortunately, Turning Point's going through their own thing right now, a bit of an internal civil war happening at the moment, but that's just American politics at the moment with the whole Republican Party. So we're going to have to kind of wait and see how the dust settles. But for me, I think it's going to come down to good men who are spiritually connected to something higher than themselves, who are willing to put their lives literally on the line for their countries and for their nations to
But
really
aren't you
cause
talking
that
about
change.
Sorry, George, aren't you talking about old-fashioned patriotism in a degree? I mean, if for those of us who are listening out there
Yeah.
who aren't of a particular religious bent or not particularly deep in the philosophical, structure,
Oh,
perhaps just good old-fashioned patriotism. You
oh,
put yourself within the community. You're not necessarily just hammering your own self-interest, which would be what was it? There's an old saying service to community, not service to self, something along those lines. Those kind of old-fashioned values that used to motivate our grandparents. Yeah,
yeah.
patriotism.
But those things were anchored. Patriotism is only anchored in a spiritual phenomena. For example, in the 1960s and the 1950s, Australia was 98% Christian. Now it's
Mm.
like 30 to 40%. So the rise of secularism, the rise of atheism has definitely caused a lack of patriotism because the only reason you're going to be so patriotic towards your country is because there's something greater than yourself, and that tends to be a God-like figure or a Christ-like figure. So, for example, I'll give you a personal example of something I've dealt with
Mm.
as a young man. When I was 23, 24 years old, I was approached by a multi-billion dollar company and they wanted to buy I wanted to buy the Adelaide Set off me. They offered me $250,000 in the first, straight off the bat, and then they offered me another $250,000 every year after that. So it'd be $1 million in total for about
Wow.
30% of my company. And then they
Mm.
wanted to use the Adelaide Set to promote. I won't say names here, by the way, just to be discreet. But they wanted to use the
Sure.
Adelaide Set to promote like apps and products that we're doing.
Mm.
And at that point, I had to decide. I'm reading through the contract, and I could just feel that if I sign this contract, if I take this money, yes, I'll be set up and I'll have a huge advantage over the rest of my peers. $1 million at that age, the notoriety, they were offering things that were any 23-year-old would say yes to. And I had to make a
Mm.
decision. If I sign this away, will I be able to use this platform one day for a political patriotic purpose? No, it would instantly be gone. I would lose the ability of my platform. I would lose my voice truly. Because every time I wanted to say something controversial, I'd have to go through some sort of HR or some sort of board, or I'd have to talk to someone else. And I ultimately made the decision, no, I'm not going to sell this part. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep it 100% owned by me. So that was a choice I had to make. I don't want to sell tickets on myself here, but that's the kind of choices people would need to make sometimes if they want to
Yeah.
really put their country first. Because I had a feeling that in the future, the way everything was heading, that something was going to happen. And 2 years later, bam, we had the pandemic. If I sold out back then, I wouldn't have been able to use the Adelaide Set as a way to expose the government mandates, expose the mRNA experimental vaccines that we weren't fully aware of. And we're seeing all the studies come out now. America's finally releasing all this stuff. I would never be able to tell the people about those things. And I'm not sure how many lives were changed or altered because of what happened during the 2020 pandemic and all the things that occurred economically, medically, and etc. But if I sold out, I never would have had that opportunity. And who knows what the future would have looked like for the state, and who knows who would have won the next election? Because, we were quite a large voice. Our platform was reaching tens of thousands of people every single day. We were the
Mm.
only media outlet putting that message out. And the only reason we could do that is because we said no to money, we said no to the influence. So, in terms of politics, that's my personal story. In terms of politics, what we have in this country is we have lobby groups. And these lobby groups come from foreign nations, from America to the Middle East to China to Taiwan. Countries all across the world have their fingers in our country with their big, deep pockets, lining our politicians, telling them what to think, telling them what to say. And that means that these politicians, our leaders, aren't Australia first anymore. They're not God first anymore. They're not spiritually connected to their country anymore. They're not patriotic to their country anymore. They are who pays the bills, who keeps me in power, who can pay for my ads for my next political campaign, who's going to pay for my volunteers. That's what this environment in Australia looks like in terms of politics now. It's not about this country. It's about the money. It's about foreign interests, and it's about lobbying big companies that really, frankly, don't have Australia first interest at heart. They have their pockets at heart first, their own country at heart first, their own big pharma, big food, big whatever you want to say. Put big in front of any company's name. You will find that they care about their company, not the country of Australia. Yeah, sure, they might have a few employees that care about Australia in there. Of course, any company has good people in there, but ultimately, what it comes down to is their own wins and their own country. So a US company is always going to put US first. A Middle Eastern country is always going to put the Middle East first. A Chinese company will always put China first. That's just the way it is. And I think Australian politicians have completely forgotten about that. And right now, there are no politicians out there in Australia who are truly Australia first. It doesn't exist in this country.
Well, that raises a very interesting point because, of course, I mean, I've been in discussion with my friends for a long time over this, and that is in Australia, we have a very weak sense of self. You're talking about countries that see themselves in the world as agents in the world. They have sovereignty, they have agency, they're prepared to protect it under every circumstance. This has never really been a modern Australian phenomenon. I mean, we got our nationalism when we asked the Brits to give us dominionship. We got it, we wanted federation. We got it. We didn't have to struggle for it. It just came to us very easily. And maybe that was because we were so far away from everywhere that it just enhanced that notion that, yeah, we don't have to struggle too hard. We're pretty safe. We've got the tyranny of distance here that protects us militarily. We've got a few people here. We've got the Aboriginals on one side, and then when the newcomers came in the bucket load, well, they'll all, in the sort of assimilationist white Australia policy context, they'll all come together as a lump of sorts. But in the sense that we're meant to be projecting some form of nationhood. We're not very strong at that. We haven't been. Some people say, of course, that this is a great advantage to Australia, that nationalism breeds all sorts of problems. That if we go down a particular path, it could lead us to the likes of, the end of the Weimar Republic and the rise of Nazism and all this kind of stuff, which of course is not necessarily true, but people like to sort of put that forward as an example of where nationalism can and has gone wrong historically. But I think that if we can't see ourselves as an integrated state, I'm going to walk away from the whole notion of assimilation because I think that it's politically unsellable in this current environment. Which leads on to another thing that we may be able to touch on afterwards about multiculturalism. But if we talk about an integrated Australian country where people, wherever they come from, their first and only priority or loyalty is to this country, and they're proud of that, and all other Australians, whether from the dominant Anglo-Celtic group or the minority groups, and there are many of them, we're all sitting on the one island continent. If we can cooperate and speak to each other in ways that make each other feel good about ourselves and the direction of our country, that's bloody brilliant. That's what Australia should be, but I'm not seeing it. Maybe I'm blind to things that other people are far wiser to, but I'm just not seeing that sense of unity of purpose around anything here.
Yeah, I think the well's been poisoned in terms of that because we had, like, for example, in Australia, for all your international viewers, we had something called the NSN here, which were a National Socialist Network group, which were basically like a Nazi group here that was very pro-white Australia. And their messaging attracted, quite a few members, thousands of members, to the point where the Australian government had to actually put laws in place to basically disassemble them and destroy their party. Where they went wrong is obviously when they're standing around things like Nazism, it's not a very attractable sale to the masses. Most
I
people
say,
that yeah, so there was something there, but they went down some weird dark fantasy around Hitler, which it's sad because if they just avoided all that and made it about Australia first instead of making it about some World War II leader who lost the war and basically was a loser essentially, why not base it around just the country? That young men wanted that, and young men were and women actually now. I'm seeing this through my own platform. Women are stepping up more than anyone else. I've never seen this many young women step up and actually say it's okay to be conservative. It's okay to be supportive of your own country. And there is this weird vibe happening online. I'm not sure if you're witnessing this on Twitter, for example, but there's a huge amount of videos going out of young, particularly white women being brutally beat up by other
no, no.
minorities. Yeah, it's happening all over Twitter at the moment. So there's like this messaging out there that, and this is kind of why I'm talking about because it's quite important here in Australia. There's like this messaging of like that white people, Anglo-Saxon people. By the way, I'm Greek, so I'm not an Anglo-Saxon, but I do like to observe things and speak of them because they're quite important topics that no one's discussing. There is this sentiment that Anglo-Saxons, Celtic peoples are kind of just like have basically given up on their own race essentially, and they're just kind of just sitting there being dormant. Then you look across the UK, which is supposed to be the heartland, the homeland of the Anglo-Celtic people. That is a place of minorities now. I mean, London is only 30% of its original native peoples. So there is like an identity crisis happening, a cultural crisis as well, which people are tapping into. And I think that's why we saw NSN rise in this country. And unfortunately, yeah, they got their messaging all wrong and they had to, I don't know why they went down the Nazi thing. And that opened up conspiracies around were they put in place on purpose to accelerate these type of legislations that could come through and basically silence any sort of nationalism? Because the reality is the greatest threat to globalism is nationalism. For example, you mentioned before that South Australia is 1.8 million people, right? About 400,000 people live in rural areas, and a lot of them are farmers and work in towns and stuff like that. What we're seeing in Europe, and this is all going to link up, by the way, what we're seeing in Europe is farmers being shut off from farming. For example, in France, we saw farmers have their diesel cut off. The French government made deals with Argentina to bring in food from Argentina instead of their own farmers. The farmers across the world are being shut down and being destroyed. And what does a farmer represent? A farmer is the ultimate individual, the ultimate survivor. A farmer has to do their own land, produce their own food. They live away from fast cities, typically are conservative, typically are religious, and an active effort across the Western world to shut down these farmers. Right now, in Australia, we're seeing the same thing. In Victoria, they just passed laws about a week ago. They just passed laws that the government can officially take any farmer's land without environmental assessment, just like that. If they feel like taking a land, they can just take it away. So farmers are actively being hunted down, censored, and destroyed. And it plays back into that one nation thing we discussed earlier, that this idea of individualism is poison. This idea of nationalism is poison. This idea of protecting your own peoples is poison. The fact that an Anglo-Saxon can't stand up and say, I'm proud to be an Anglo-Saxon without being called a Nazi is ridiculous. As a Greek, as a Greek Australian, I'm very proud of my Greek roots. I'm very proud of my ancient Greek history. When I look back at people like King Leonidas or Plato or Socrates, all these greats, it brings me much joy and pride. If I talk to an English person now, if I talk to an Anglo-Saxon and say, "Oh, do you remember how cool English history was?" They don't have that sense of pride anymore. It's guilt, it's shame, it's disgust. And as an ethnic Greek who loves the British culture, who loves the Commonwealth and everything they've ever done for the world, the British Commonwealth has done so much good for this world. Literally has transformed the world as we know it together. And now there is so much shame for Anglo-Saxons, including in this country, to the point where in our country on Australia Day, you can't even celebrate your own country anymore. If people get arrested for celebrating their country here, you can burn the Australian flag in this country. You can spit on the Australian flag in this country. You can ask for white genocide in this country, and you won't get in trouble. But if you criticize another minority, you can go to jail for a year or two. That's the level that nationalism is under attack. So there is definitely some sort of great nationalism is a threat to globalism. I think it simply is that. I think the world, the financial systems, the governmental systems, as our technology gets better, as our economy grows, I think our almost top 1% wants a sort of globalized, centralized power system. We see social media being centralized now. You can't even access a Facebook social media site without scanning your Face ID. Your biometric identity now is online. Everything is being pushed together like some sort of Big Brother atmosphere. And I think that also plays into why our politics has gotten so bad, because it's all around this globalized, centralized government. And I think that is the source of all the things that we're discussing today. I think that's the real problem. So I guess, can I ask you a quick question? What are your thoughts on globalization? What are your thoughts of a centralized government? Do you like the idea of us becoming just one entity, or do you like the idea of having separate countries who have their own, sense of sovereignty?
Well, at the risk of sounding very odd, because my politically conservative nature will come out, but I will say that I I like the idea of diversity, but I don't mean it in the left sense of diversity. I like the idea of having multiple opinions. I like the idea of being able to sit down with a glass of wine and debate politics into the wee small hours. And whether or not I agree or disagree with the person across from me is irrelevant. It's the fact that sometimes, and sometimes it's more often than not actually, when I'm sitting there and I'm listening to what the other person is saying, it does one of either two things. It either sharpens my own thinking about the world, or it gives me a different angle at which I can either choose to integrate the other part, the other person's view, or not. So I think that you need to have that diversity of view. I do believe in democracy. I do believe in nation states, and I think that it's illusory to create an international, homogenized, standardized version of the human condition. I think that it's unrealistic and it crushes all hope. But, just to push back on a couple of things that you've said, because I think that you and I would agree on a few things, but some of the things I would say, and here, George, believe me when I tell you, my cynicism will always guide me through these kind of arguments. And that is, yes, I agree, have a world of nation states. But you know what? That technology that you speak of, that's already out and about. You can't tell me with a straight face that no nationalist government will pick up on that technology, centralize power in whatever national capital, and make life completely and utterly unlivable in that polity. It just doesn't happen because human nature, it's like you want to have a situation where power comes together. Fine, it's efficient and effective, but once it comes together, it is like a self-licking ice cream. It continues to double down on the same stuff. And if you enable that power to have the sorts of technologies that are now being unleashed on the world, no government, no human authority, whether national or multinational, will not abuse that. And this is where I think that I would push back because I think, yes, it's great what you say, but in the end, humans are humans, and whether or not you're in some sort of multinational universe that sits on top of the global authorities and such, or whether you're the chief poobah of a nation state, the inkling will always be, oh, I've got this technology now. Oh, let me see. CCTV cameras all over the place. That sounds like a good idea. I mean, look at what's happened to China and the surveillance state. Here's an example of nationalism going down a particular path and probably not doing all that much for the non-Han community within China. And, we're talking about, tens of millions of people who are being oppressed by local authorities. So again, I think one has to be careful for what you wish for because sometimes it ain't going to be so. So my cynicism will guide me on that one.
Well, have you heard the idea of transhumanism and the future of transhumanism?
I don't
Because
like it. I don't like it. I've heard of it. I don't like it.
you've
But go
heard of it,
on.
yeah. Because the idea
Yeah.
is, and you see it in the education system, particularly with left-leaning public school systems, is like even young kids today in Australia, they're not they're being taught not to even identify with a gender anymore. So even the ideas of male and female are being blurred for young kids. I remember as a 90s kid and an early 2000s kid, when I went to school, the only thing I had to worry about was Pokemon cards and if I could get my next Pokemon
Yeah.
card. Now
Yeah.
kids are coming back and they're making agreements that they're not even he or she, they're called theys now. And that's what's being taught at schools across the world in Western countries. So there is this idea of transhumanism. Transhumanism means the idea of identity, the idea of nationalism. That's my dog. Sorry, guys. The
No,
idea
sorry.
of the idea of any sort of duality in the universe is gone. So I think that all leads to this thing that you mentioned about China, like a social credit system. Everyone is surveilled. There's any dissenting voice is shut down, and you either follow the system or you get cut off from the system. And if you don't
Right.
follow the system, you're going to end up losing ability to use public transport. You might not be able to use healthcare anymore. You might
Right.
lose your weekly payment from the government.
Mm.
So there's all these control mechanisms that can be utilized, and I think as technology gets better, world powers will try and utilize this technology for more control. And we're seeing that across the legislation being built here in Australia with the under 16s ban. We have now the anti-Semitism bill, which basically creates a hate speech laws. So you can't even criticize theological differences anymore. If I had a theological, so say I was theologically opposed to something, if I made a critical decision around some sort of theology, I could go to jail for that in this country now, which is ridiculous. And we're seeing that as well.
Mm.
And it also there's no like it's like who gets to decide who is right and who's wrong? Who's the arbiter of truth? Who is that anymore? It's the government in this country, and it's whoever gets the most upset. The victim
But
mindset.
will it not also be the government in any other context? I mean,
Yeah, of course.
this is where I'm kind of coming back to the ideal nation state. The ideal nation state is one that is democratic and permissive up to a point, but has a very strong sense of itself and doesn't sell its history out and doesn't do all of the things that you were saying quite clearly we're going through at present. But again, I don't see that coming from the populist right. You know, the populist right is giving us a sense of strength. It's promising us all kinds of things that they are not going to go down the path of the uni party, the establishment, the Epsteins and all the other stuff that we're, being crammed on. And that's fine. But there's no guarantee, George. And this is where I kind of like sit back and say, I get it, but where is the escape clause if it all goes pear-shaped? Because human beings are flawed. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't aspire to higher things. It doesn't mean that we don't have better philosophies. It doesn't mean that we don't try to improve ourselves. But it's also a case of moving too fast down a particular line will also net us the result that we don't want. You know, that social credit system that you speak of in China, it is a bloody offensive piece of national legislature. I mean, we would balk. I think that if any time Australians would man the barricades and throw Molotov cocktails, it would be if any government in this country, nationalist, Labor, whatever, decided to go down that path. Then you're going to end up having civil war here
I th
because
I think
it's
we're ready.
not
I think we're
something.
there. To be honest, sorry to interrupt, but I think we're almost
Yeah.
there now. If you look at South Australia's economy, it's being propped up by public service. Yeah, there's a lot of public servants needed for particular roles like healthcare, for example. But
Mm.
we don't have an
Not doing a good
economy that
job.
yeah, we don't have an economy built in industrial industrial infrastructural building things. Like, we're not building things here. We're just creating more government jobs, handing out more money to people. Okay, we saw in the pandemic, everyone was being handed out money to survive at some point. Well, most
Mm.
people were, right? Let's say 80% of the population, just rough
Mm.
number. So they already have the data. Like the pandemic would have been a great data exercise for any system. They would use that data to then send off to companies to then try and figure out models around social credit. We have the rise of virtual reality. I mean, if 30% of the population wants to just check out and sit in a virtual reality world for the rest of their lives and get that weekly payment, enough to survive, enough to buy food to maintain themselves, but then plug back into their virtual reality. I mean, that's a very real future for a lot of people. Young men in particular, I'm not sure the exact statistics. A lot of young men now aren't even finding partners. Have you heard?
Look, I agree. It's an absolute travesty. But where is the responsibility for all of this? I mean, I understand the fact that, as an individual, you should take responsibility for yourself. And to a degree, I think most people try to. Some people fail, some people are better at it than others. But in the end, government is being paid royally to fix these things, right? I mean, these are social problems that can only be fixed by politics. And if politics has decided to say, I'm quite happy with things. We got a nice tight labor market. We've got automation, sucking up whatever jobs that happen to be out there for human labor. We don't worry about that anymore. The robots will do it. With that kind of stinking attitude, that sort of transhumanism that you talk about, but not in the transgender way. I'm just talking about,
Yeah,
replacing
just
people with,
transhumanism. Yeah.
yeah, just replacing the human with the machine. This is the thing that all our governments seem to be supporting because there's no pushback against that. It's like a natural part of our evolution. I don't subscribe to it, but I see it happen. And, we have to get back to the South Australian election, by the way, George, because
Well, this is all important. This is all part of it.
it
But
is
by the
all,
way,
yeah.
I'll say something a bit. This is not my. I'll say something that's kind of controversial, but I think the idea of liberalism has failed. We've tried the experimental liberalism for 60 years now, and I think it's failed. I think it's got us. It's shown us some sort of enlightenment towards how society could be, but I think going back to basics. going back to duality, the ancient ways that humans have lived for thousands of years, there was something magical in that. There's a reason why these ideas lasted thousands of years. I think even like the idea of men and women working together in the corporate work sense has kind of failed us. Young kids aren't growing up with mothers or fathers. They're being pushed into public schools early, where the school then becomes the parent essentially. Um,
Mm.
Women are incentivized to have children at 35 to 40 to freeze their eggs, where we're asking questions, oh, why is fertility rate so bad? Why is our food full of microplastics? Why have I just saw a study of blueberries full of toxins and pesticides that cause cancer? Our foods
Mm.
are killing us. Our foods are full of microplastics. Our kids are being brought up by the government and not our parents and families anymore. There used to be a sense of pride in a village brings up a child. The idea of a mother and father, a mother being at home, looking after the kid, teaching it the ideals, like those things are all gone or getting lost and more and more. And you only see it in small ethnic communities. The Indians here in Australia do quite a good job of having quite close-knit communities, including even the Muslim communities. They also
Yeah,
have
yeah.
this idea of like a
Mm.
family unit staying together. The
Mm.
Anglo-Saxons have none of that. When you're 16 years old, you're out of the house. That's all going to change as well because young kids can't afford homes anymore. They have to rent.
See, I agree with you. I mean, on that score, we have absolutely no difference. I
Yeah.
lived in the Middle East. I've lived in a traditional Arab household, and I will say that the way that the intergenerational family structure plays out is something that I was familiar with because, of course, just for your information, I mean, uh, I don't want to say that word. Just a word popped into my head about describing myself, but I'm a 50-50. I'm a Friulano Italian on the one side from ancestry, and then I'm an Austrian on the other. And, Central European is what I would say my ancestry is. But growing up here in Australia, um, I could see the ethnic communities and see that sort of that thing that you talk about die out with my generation coming through, who did a great job in integrating themselves into Anglo norms in Australia, which is terrific. But when those norms started to then, I don't know, do you call it perverted or imploded, or they did something to
But
those standards and norms. But the idea of family and community, well, those things started drying up even among the ethnics who lauded themselves over the Anglos because they thought that they had something superior.
Mm, yeah, I think to be honest, I think it comes down to this third wave feminism. I think it's been a huge source of problems. Like, I know, like even in my close circles and people around, I know women who say that they never want to have children, they never want to have families, because they don't want to bring them into a world of global climate change and and men are so oppressive and this world is so bad. Like these are the ideas that have been fed into people's minds since I was 7 years old.
Mm.
And once you have these ideas, this I call it the domestication process. We all are domesticated, young kids, and that domestication process is very, very fixed. It's a fixed mindset, and it's very hard to change anyone's mind on anything. So if you're brought up as a young woman, told that you shouldn't have a family, that the world's going to end, that being a mother is oppressive, that you need to be a boss woman and leave and not find a man and men are evil and all this stuff, then what kind of society are you building? It's such a godless, philosophicalist. I don't know if that's a word. It just feels because philosophy just means the love of life. I feel like all the ideas, all the love of life has been completely sucked out, and has led to
Well,
nihilism. We have a generation of nihilism now where no one has
yeah.
hope. Even you, like the way you talk about human leadership, it sounds like nihilism. Like you're like, oh, the cynicalism. It's like, oh, I don't even believe that humans can have leadership structures because we're so bad at it. So,
No, no, no. Hang on. No, I'll defend myself on that one, George. I'm sorry to say. I don't believe that that's exactly what I said. I do think that I have cynicism, but
okay.
cynicism comes from experience, and experience tells me that what I wish for will not be the perfect outcome. It might be an improved outcome, and I'm happy to see that improved outcome. But for me, I'll never see the end state as being heaven on earth. I mean, I think that Australia could be far, far better as a country than it is. We've got the resources, we've got the human capital, we've got a bunch of dolts running us politically, both federally and state-wise. Those are problems that we can actually fix in the real world. These are things that we ought to be aiming for. And even a cynic like myself, someone bitter and twisted who has been in the political system and who has seen it from the inside, can say, yes, I can sign up to that. But show me the party that's going to sign up to that and show me the evidence that that is exactly what they're going to be doing. And that's where the wheels in the back of my head keep on thinking, John, you've been there, you've done it, you've seen these
Yeah,
people, you've seen the
I
people who get promoted into politics. They can't or they won't do that, right?
well, I look, I appreciate that sentiment because I'm not sure if you've seen my latest. I did a podcast with the Ashton Hearn, who's the
Ah, I did see it. I'm glad you
yeah,
raised it.
okay.
Right.
Yeah, I raised
Yeah.
these questions, and I just did a podcast with Carlos recently that went live. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to self promote here. I'm just
No, no,
these
no.
pod.
Go.
I think these podcasts, in terms of public record, are some of the most important podcasts that have ever been done in Australian political modern history. Because I ask these questions directly to these leaders' faces. I say, will you fight these global agendas? Will you
Mm.
put Australia first? I asked them to their faces. And Ashton Hearn said yes, the Liberal Party will be the party that fights globalism. It's on record now. She said that. So we can hold her accountable to that. I've asked One Nation to their faces, will you serve the Australian people first, or will you put foreign nations ahead of us? Will you
Mm.
serve us first, or are you going to put the foreign pharmaceutical companies or the big food companies ahead of us, or the mining companies, or this? All of these parties have made big promises. And
They have.
I think Carlos's answers, the latest podcast I did with Carlos, I think there is hope there. Like I asked him some pretty tough questions, and he seems quite animated. He does seem quite colourful. So maybe what Australia needs isn't these well-oiled political machines, these Hollywood actors. Maybe we do need these salt of the earth types, these Carloses out there, these just typical hardworking Australians who might not be doctors or philosophers or professors, but or business leaders, but maybe they really just love their country, care about their country, who are willing to say no to the big deals. I think that's the most important thing. We need politicians who are willing to say no to the big money deals because you're right. I'm telling you from personal experience. I've worked in state parliament. I've worked in federal parliament. I've worked in minister's office. As soon as you enter that political realm, the big money offers get delivered. And it doesn't
Of
come
course.
through some official means. It comes from a little meeting, a little event. Someone has a conversation with you. They'll say, hey, we're from this lobby, or hey, we're from this country, and we think you should support us. And then they'll
Mm.
ask you, how much money do you make? How much money do you want to make? They'll ask you these questions. It's prompted in a very sophisticated way. But this is what happens across all leadership groups in this country and across the Western world. And I'm sure it happens in the East as well. But
Mm.
we
No,
need leaders.
it's a disease. And look, George, it's a disease, and I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping. I look here. The key thing about this conversation that we're having today is hope. For me, it's hope, right?
Yeah.
Because I've lived a long and fruitful life. I've been in politics, I've been out of politics, but I've never really left politics. I've always had both feet firmly in the camp. I know I've had many Greek friends in my time. I know how politically passionate they are. So you're no stranger to me, George. I understand where you're coming from. But also us Central Europeans, a little bit further north and center in Europe, are also very politically minded. And I came from a family where the mum, dad, and myself would sit around the table, open up a bottle of wine, and talk until the wee small hours about what we saw in the 6 o'clock news. That was normal for myself, and I'm sure it was a similar situation for you and your family. So we already have that in us, right? So the one thing that I'm desperately searching for, and I think many other South Australians and Australians are searching for, is hope. They want hope. And when I see what's on offer, yes, there are some good things, especially when it comes to. I'll tell you about my view of One Nation, especially the state candidates that I've seen so far. I'm actually quite heartened by what One Nation has put forward. And the reason why I'm heartened is because they are the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the guy down the street, the sparky that comes to the house to fix your your electrical problems, the carpenter. These are people that we need to have in Parliament. We don't need professional politicians anymore. We need people that can speak to people, people who can connect with a broader community. The very foundation of the nation is about people coming together and not speaking from the top down, but coming together sort of as equals, basically. And I think that
Yeah,
if you end up having more elite people coming into the system and telling you what to do when they feel like telling you what to do, that's where your democracy starts falling to pieces, right?
exactly. Yeah. I honestly look, I totally agree. I think in a practical secular sense, we need people who love their country, who are salt of the earth, who
Yeah,
want to do anything for their country.
yeah.
And two, another cornerstone is we need people who are willing to say no to the big money deals, no to the big fancy offers. That's going to
That will take discipline though, George. That will take a lot of discipline because times are tough right now. And if someone walked through the door with money bags and said, "John, this is yours. All you need to do is wait for my call. And one day I'll ask you for a little favor." I mean, it's a very mafia way of thinking
yeah.
things through, but it's kind of like that. But when times are desperate, people are more inclined to go with the money than they are because they have families, they've got mortgages, they've got a whole bunch of stuff that they need to pay off. So again, knowing these human foibles, you're right, but the kind of discipline that one has to have at that individual level, not to be corrupted, not to move forward. Oh, yeah,
Well, that's my third point here, and I'm
man.
sure your secular lawyers might not want to hear this, but that's where a level of faith is required. Because the thing
Right.
is, even if you are an atheist, I mean, even if you are an atheist, like Richard Dawkins, right, recently
Mm,
said, I'm not Christian, but I'm a cultural Christian. So you need
mm,
to have a level of respect of how powerful faith can truly be. If you like, think about this: if you're a human, your archetype is, I believe there is a something greater than me, a God who's loving, who's perfect love, perfect forgiveness, perfect innocence, who wants to help and humanity for the greater good, like a divine purpose, like a almost like the King Arthur type with the Excalibur, and you have Merlin, you have your knights, and you're gonna fight for your country, you're gonna fight for something for the people you love. That Braveheart spirit, you need that. You can't, otherwise, those other two things will just fall away. There's no one out there who will have those qualities. There is a level of faith. I think right now we live in a society that is physically obsessed with materialism. We love the material things. I love screens. We love touching the
mm,
iPad. We love touching the phones,
mhm.
and we love buying clothes, and we love going out and eating food. We love all the passions of this world. And then we have people who love the mind, and we love science, and we love numbers, and we love proof, and we love images, and like we got to know, and we love the idea that humans can be like, yeah, I'm so certain that we are that it's just us, and that we're just subatomic particles, and this is nothing, and one day you're gonna die, and everything's oblivion. Sure, but we've lost touch with our ancient roots of spirituality. I think spirituality, philosophy are truly some of the most fundamental aspects of what it means to be human, that mystery of life. Without mystery of life, there is no beauty. It's just if you're so certain of something, then you're just missing out on what it really means to love life, I think. So
And look, on that point, you're also limiting yourself because again, when you take the more expansive view of our place in the universe, let alone our place politically in a nation state or in the world generally, you know, um, yeah, I think you need to see the richness in things, and I think you're absolutely right. We tend to have downplayed that, and if you've got that view where I know everything, there is nothing else that I need to know because science tells me, or my interpretation of science tells me that the universe is locked down, and I know where I stand, and yes, I'm going to die, and my body will, decompose, and that's the end of it. That's the end of life, right? That I think is showing a poverty of existence because when you start thinking along those lines, look, I'm not a religious person, but I'm not an atheist. I'm an agnostic. I do think that there's something a little bit, there is something out there. I don't know what it is. I call it the universe. I think the universe is conscious. Call me crazy, but that's what I think.
no, it's fine, perfectly fine.
In the end, I don't call it God, but I know that there is something out there, and that's what I feel comfortable understanding about things. But I have to say, you know, I would never take that bleak approach, and I think that I pity the people who do. I think that yes, you can be atheistic and see the beauty in life. Maybe you see it in the sense that life is short and therefore every day needs to be treasured because you don't know how long you're going to be on the planet for instance. I mean, that's one way of seeing beauty. It's not my preferred choice, but it's others, and I can respect that. Final couple of questions then, and
Yeah.
let's keep it down to the South Australian election. Yes, I did see your interview with Ashton Hearn. But
Hmm.
Ashton Hearn took over the party, the Liberal Party here in South Australia back in December 2025. I don't know what was thinking in the minds of those people in the Liberal Party thinking that she could be competitive against the likes of Peter Malinauskas. Peter Malinauskas, who happens to be the archetypal pretty boy of Australian, not just South Australian, but Australian politics. Everyone seems to love him. And, I think that it's going to, when I saw your interview with Ashton, I could, understand she was telegenic. I could understand that, the questions that you asked, she answered to the best of her capacity. But then I think to myself, she only had 2 months basically to prepare for an election against a very strong incumbent. So what should the Liberal Party do? And what should Ashton Hearn be looking at? Should she be, fighting Malinauskas aggressively leading up to the election? We only have a few days left, and quite frankly, I've been underwhelmed by how much I've seen of her, whether it be on the social media or even just the general media for that matter. So I don't know. I mean, what should she do? I mean, she's got a few days to go. Uh,
I
does she
think
keep
I
the low target sort of strategy or what?
I think Ashton has to think long term here. I don't think I think she understands that there's no winning this election now, and I think most people
Yeah.
understand. I think the Liberal Party even understand that. But there's always going to be a little bit of hope that maybe you could do an underdog story. But realistically speaking, I think I asked Asher this in the interview. I said, "Are you here for the long term? You're not just going to give up after one
Mm,
election." So I think Ashton has to look to the future and use this as an opportunity to catapult herself. She needs to address Australia first. She needs to be actually behind her word, say no to these global agendas and really focus on what Australians need, like local
yeah.
Australians need.
Yeah.
And if she can sell that and mean it and be an advocate for that, then she will have something powerful to work with.
Mm,
If she
mm,
can't do
mm.
that, it would just be more of the same story. Remember, the Labor Party wants a weak Liberal Party.
Yeah,
They
they
don't
do.
want
Yeah.
a strong Liberal Party, and they don't want a strong One Nation Party. And that you can see that in the preference flows. Whoever you put last is your greatest threat.
Mm,
So for the Labor Party, the Greens are their greatest allies, and the One Nation is their greatest threat. So Liberal Party actually is a positive thing for Labor Party. They don't want Liberal Party completely wiped out. I know for a fact that the Labor Party doesn't want to overstretch and completely destroy the Liberal Party because if they
mm,
get replaced with One Nation, who can be a true opposition, then Labor Party have problems. And the Labor Party and the Greens are panicking because
mm,
they're bleeding votes. A lot of Labor people, especially in the trades, are moving to One Nation. When you
mm,
have mass immigrants coming here, you have, for example, I'll tell you a short story. We have people in the trucking industry, for example, and from Indian backgrounds who are coming, right? They've come from India. They get paid nothing in India, right? They come here and $20 an hour is a miracle. That's almost like as much as lawyers get paid back in India. And what they're doing is, for example, in the truck industry, is they will start truck companies that undercut everyone else. They work for
mhm,
barely any money. But to them, that bit of money is like as much as lawyers would make back in their home city. So it's revolutionary for them. But who does that hurt? It hurts all those established truck companies that have been around for decades or generations who can be completely wiped out by these people who are willing to work for nothing.
mm.
So those things need to be addressed and they need to be addressed soon. Otherwise, I don't know. It's just very bleak. One nation, if not the solution to our problems, is definitely the stepping stone in the right direction. That's my biggest takeaway from all of this. I think South Australia is heading to its healing moment. I'm not sure if you're a big Star Wars fan, but I only think there's so much the Sith can win before the Force tries to bring back some sort of balance. And we're going to
Yeah.
see that. And if it's One Nation now, and maybe One Nation can get us to step four, if another party has to come after One Nation, maybe a Reform Australia or some other party comes in after, then so be it. But there is hope there. There is a roadmap towards South Australia and Australia healing itself and becoming a great nation again. It's just going to require a lot of people with courage, with bravery, people like you, for example, becoming activated, people in the community who want to help out, who want to volunteer, and also people willing to say no to the big money deals, people who are willing to say yes to Australia First policies, and people who are smart, intelligent, and also hardworking and salt of the earth, all coming together, unified
Yeah.
under a force of Australia first, people first, this nation first. Let's take back this country from these global entities, and let's fix the food. We need to fix the food. Let's fix the
Yeah.
fertility issues, and let's fix the economy, because this economy is a false economy and it's a disaster, and it's just really sad to see. So that's kind of,
And let's get some oil refineries back into this country.
we need some oil refineries and keep the gas companies open, and
Yep.
also we need Turning Point to really we're grounded in Orthodox roots here in Australia. So, just quickly on Turning Point, my role and Joel's role is to facilitate the people of Australia with information, with positivity, with empowerment, to provide them all the resources they need to vote correctly, to volunteer correctly, to understand their political system, to give them the news that others aren't giving them, to bypass the mainstream media. And we need the politicians who Carlos has promised, if One Nation gets in power, they're going to help people like you and me, our voices be heard stronger. Because right now, there's an active effort by the Uni Party, the Labor and Liberal Party, to shut down voices like us. And we can't have that. We need to have independent journalism, independent media be at the cornerstone of all this that's going forward.
George-Alexander Mamalis, thank you for joining us on The Focus.
Thank you.
Now on to questions for our audience. When voters choose a leader today, are they voting for policies or simply the person they feel most comfortable with? Do you think emphasizing the country-city divide helps politicians understand real concerns, or does it risk deepening divisions that already exist? What matters more for an opposition party trying to win power? Better policies, stronger personalities, or simply waiting for the government to make a mistake? Let us know what you think in the comments section, and tell us where you're watching from. We always enjoy seeing how far the conversation travels beyond Australia. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like, subscribe, and share this episode. My thanks as ever to the producers of The Focus, Neil Smart and Lynn Sear. From Adelaide, South Australia, I'm John Bruni, and you've been listening to The Focus Podcast.